Congratulations on making it to Chapter 7 of the Complete Web Developer course. Now, so far we've been mostly focused on HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now they're all front-end or client-side languages because they happen on the user's computer. So in your Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer browser, the HTML and the CSS and JavaScript are interpreted right there. So those languages are responsible for the look of a website, the layout, the style, and the interaction with the user. Now the back end of a website is where what's known as the business logic happens. So this is things like sending emails, or saving information to a database, or posting a tweet. All of those sort of things happen on the server side of a website setup. Now there are a number of different languages that you can use to program servers. We're going to be looking at one called PHP. PHP is extremely widely used on the internet. It's supported by all servers, and there's a huge amount of software already written in PHP. WordPress among them, but there's many other programs that you can use and manipulate if you understand PHP. If you want to look into other server-side languages, then take a look at Python, Node.js, and Ruby. There are many more. If you have a Google, you'll find lots and lots of languages to choose from. So what is PHP? You can have a quick look at the history of PHP if you like. PHP.net is a fantastic resource. If you're working with PHP and you do some Googling on a particular topic, you're bound to come across PHP.net. It's very well explained, very comprehensive. So the history of PHP, you can read a little bit about here if you like. It's created in 1994 by a chap called Rasmus Lerdorf. It was actually initially stood for Personal Homepage Tools, or PHP Tools. But these days it's usually considered to stand for Hypertext Processor. So PHP can be run very easily on a server, but we do need a server to work with PHP. So if you haven't already, now's the time to set up your free web hosting. And in the next video, I'll show you how to create your first PHP page and run a little bit of basic code. In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to get a PHP script up and running. First of all, I'm going to bring in FireFTP, running on Firefox. If you haven't got your FTP client set up yet, then go back to the first chapter of the course and follow the videos explaining how to do that. Again, free web hosting is provided with the course, so you don't need to go and purchase that with anyone else. So I've set up my anytestdomainwillwork.com domain. So I just click connect. There we go. I'm online. So if I double click on public HTML, there's my files in the public area of my website. It might be worth editing the connection and setting the default remote directory to be public HTML, because it's that folder that you're going to be working in most of the time. Okay. And then I'm going to create a new directory called PHP, where I'm going to put all of my PHP files. Double click on there, and then I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it index.php. Now all the files we've been using so far have been .html files because they've had an HTML file type. We want the server to run our files as a PHP file, so we use the .php extension to do that. Okay, my file's been created. Now I just click Command O on my Mac or Control O on a PC, or you can use Open or Open With. I'm just going to use Open there, and now the file is loaded up in my browser. In my text editor. So I can now put FireFTP into the background. Now I'm editing my index.php document live. I'll bring back Chrome over here. So if you remember from the initial video setting up FTP, I created an index page and I went to the temporary URL, which has this IP address in the front and then the domain name afterwards. If you're using a live domain name, that's great. You don't need to use the IP address, but you do need to purchase the domain name to be able to do that, whereas you can use this completely free. So all I need to do is put a little bit of content in there. For the moment, I'll just do a quick bit of text. Hello world. And then this was in my PHP folder /index.php. So there's my hello world, great. But to really use a bit of PHP, we should start with that. So to tell the browser that we're using PHP, we use that collection of symbols. So a less than sign, followed by a question mark, followed by the letters PHP. And that's just like the script tag in HTML that tells the server that we're now doing some PHP code. So any code inside these two sets of symbols will be interpreted as PHP. So how do we get text to appear on the page using PHP? We use the command echo. So we just write echo, and then we use quotes. You can use double quotes or single quotes. This is PHP. And then, just like with JavaScript, we put a semicolon at the end of the line. Save that. Fantastic. You've just written your first bit of PHP and generated your first bit of dynamic HTML. Now with JavaScript, when we had an error in our code, we could look at the console down in Developer Tools there, the JavaScript console, and that would tell us what was going on and if we had any errors. With PHP, because it's happening on the server, we can't do that. So we need another way to enable PHP errors. So let's start by finding out how we do that. I'm going to bring in my Fire FTP again, and this time I'm going to create a new file, and this file is going to be called php.ini. So php.ini is a special file which the server uses to see if you've got any special setup options when you're running your PHP. So by default, most servers will not activate error reporting. This is because when you've got a website in production, you don't want errors to be reported because they might reveal certain facts about your server which you don't want the public to have access to. So generally, having errors switched off is a good idea. However, when you're in active development and working on a website, it can be very useful to be able to see what's going on in your code, what line the error's at, etc. So let's open this php.ini file. Opens up in my text editor again. There it is. So here we can change a number of different options, but there are just two that we're going to look at now, and they're pretty straightforward. The first one is display errors equals on. Simple as that. So that will show errors, and we'll also enable display startup errors. Switch those on as well so that we can see every type of error that might be taking place. So if I save that, and now close down php.ini, so if I now make an error in my code by perhaps removing that double quotes, and then save it, and refresh the page, I now get a nice parse error telling me that there's an issue in line 7. Why line 7? Well, because it hasn't actually found the end of the line here. It's waiting for the end of the double quotes, which was started there, and it reaches the end of the code unexpectedly. So that's why you get this unexpected end, because it wasn't ready to finish because it hadn't found the end of the double quotes there. So let's save that again, bring it back. Great, so there's my code which is working. So remember, when you're developing a website, it's a really good idea to have these error messages displaying because it helps you debug your code much more quickly. But if you're actually in production, which means that your website is being used actively by your users, definitely turn the errors off because they can reveal certain bits of information about your server which you don't want hackers and other people having access to. In the next few videos, we'll see some of the basics of programming and how we can implement those in PHP. We'll start with variables. So let's just set up our environment. Everything looks good. Okay, so a variable in PHP always starts with a string. So slightly similar to jQuery there, although jQuery functions also start with strings, so it's slightly different. So if we create a variable called test, we can set that equal to I'm a variable, like that. Okay, so that will create our variable. If we then want to display it, we just say echo test. Refresh that. Fantastic. Easy enough. What if we wanted to put a double quote in our variable? Well, if I try and do that, you'll notice my coloring has gone a little bit wrong. What will it actually do? We get an error on line 3. So there's an error here. That's because PHP thinks that I want to finish the string with this double quote, whereas actually I just want to put this double quote inside the string. So we need to do something called escaping characters. All we do is we put a backslash in front of that double quote there, and that tells the server that I don't want to end the string, I just want to quote it out. So I want to put those double quotes in there and display them rather than end the string. So if we now run that, that's working fine, although I'd rather have a single quote there. So it looks right. Okay. We can put numbers in our variable names, so we can have test2, say me too, and then let's display both of those. Great. Okay, one after the other. If we want to concatenate them, that means display them together. In JavaScript, we would have used the plus symbol. So just like that, we would say test1 plus test2. We don't do that in PHP. We use a dot instead. So the dot is the method for concatenating, for bringing variables together in PHP. If we refresh that, it should look exactly the same. There it is. So the first test and the second test. Now we can do numerical variables as well. So let's have a number 75. And let's display our number. There it is. Great, and just like with JavaScript, we can manipulate those numbers and do whatever we like with them. So if I want to divide that by 3, I just put /3, and it does the maths for me. Plus 42, put some brackets in, divided by 21, add 17, etc. You get the idea. 22.57, etc., etc. There's a couple of rules with variables, things you can't do, and they're mostly to do with variable names and putting things at the beginning of the variable name. So, for example, if I try to have a variable called toTest instead of test2, maybe I'll set that equal to 21 and try and print it out. We get a parse error because it's an unexpected number there. We can't have a number at the beginning of a variable name. We can also put variables inside strings very easily. So maybe I'm going to have a variable called name, and we'll set it equal to the string Rob. And then if I want to write my name is Rob, very simple. Like that. My name is, and then string name. Oops, I've still got my invalid name there. Let's run that. There we go. My name is Rob. Another way of achieving that is to concatenate the two strings. So my name is a single string, and then if I put a dot there and then name afterwards, I get the same effect. So my name is followed by the string. One final nice little trick that I'll just show you is variable variables. Now, what on earth is a variable variable? Let's say I have a variable string A, and I set that equal to the word name. Then maybe I want to display the variable that has the name. If I want to do that, I can use string A like that. So this string A has the value name, and the value of the variable name is Rob. So this should display Rob. There we go. Fantastic. You don't need those very often, but it's a nice little trick sometimes to use. So that's a quick introduction to PHP variables. You'll remember from the JavaScript part of the course that arrays are similar to variables, but they can store several different values at once. So let's see how we define an array in PHP. There's a number of different ways to do it. I'll show you a few of them, and then you can pick whichever one you like best. So let's have a variable called myArray. So the easiest way to define an array is to just use the command array and then put your values separated by columns into a bracket. So let's have pizza, chocolate, and coffee this time. Just like that. So now we've created our array. What if we want to display it? We can't just echo my array. Let's see what happens if I try and do that. It just displays the word array because that's what my array is. If we want to actually display the array, we need another command. Again, there's a few ways you can do this, but I use the print_r command. So print_r will display the elements of the array for you. So we've got keys and values here. The keys are the values of the keys allow you to access the values of each variable within this array. So my array 0 is pizza, my array 1 is chocolate, and my array 2 is coffee. Let's see how we would access one of those by itself. We just say, what's my array 2? Like that. So we use square brackets this time to get to a particular value within an array. So you can see there, my array 2 is coffee. If I make it my array 1, we get chocolate. What happens if I put my array 5? Nothing. You'll notice that PHP is slightly kinder than JavaScript in that if you try and display a variable that doesn't exist, then PHP won't break. We can still carry on. I'm still going. But it will just display nothing. So it will return a variable that doesn't exist as nothing and then keep on going. That can be quite useful in some cases. So we've defined our array there. What other ways can we use to do this? Well, let's first just echo a couple of line breaks so that our next code will appear a couple of lines down. We can simply define an array like this. So we don't actually need to tell PHP that this is an array. We can just say another array, square bracket 0 is equal to pizza. And then because we're using the square bracket, then the PHP will assume that we want another array to be an array. One. Let's have something a bit healthier this time. Yogurt. And then if we display that new array, see how it looks? Works fine. So 0 is pizza, 1 is yogurt. So those are two ways to set up an array. I'll show you one more. You might want to use a definition similar to the first line here, but maybe you don't want the keys to be 0, 1, and 2. Maybe you want to define the keys by yourself. So let's have another couple of line breaks and see how we do this. So third array is going to equal array, and this time we're going to split up those brackets and we'll have some languages this time. So let's say France is French. You can see I've used the equals and a greater than sign there to denote that this is the key and this is the value. So the key is the country name in this case, and the value is the language. Let's have USA. And we'll have Germany. German. We don't need a comma after that last one. So now let's just display that. There we go. So there's our variables within our array. Our keys are now whatever we want them to be, and our values are just plain strings. Finally, just a couple more things that you can do with arrays. What if you want to add an array or add a variable on the end of an array, but you don't know how many variables there are within the array? Well, we can do that very easily. Let's go back to our another array. So we want to add a third type of food there. Then we just say another array, and then we use an empty pair of square brackets. Let's keep on our healthy track. So another array, empty square brackets, is salad. If we now put a couple of line breaks and display that, you can see we've now got pizza, yogurt, and salad. So that's just added an array on the end of the array that already existed. The last thing we'll look at here is removing an element from an array. So we'll have another break there. And let's remove this third item from third array. All we do is unset that particular value. So we use the keyword unset, and then we'll do third array, oops, Germany. Now notice that over here, when we displayed my array 5, I didn't use quotes around the 5 because the 5 is just a number, just an integer. Here, Germany is a string, so I need to put double quotes around my string to tell PHP that this is a string, not a number. Okay, and then let's just display the array to show that the third country has gone. There it is. So we've only got France and the USA as our two countries left. We can also do that with normal variables. So let's just quickly see that. If I've got a variable, let's set my name again. If I display that, we get Rob at the bottom. If on the previous line I unset name, then it's no longer there. So this unset command can be used for any type of variable, a variable or an array. That's a quick introduction to arrays in PHP. Continuing our look at basic programming structures in PHP, let's take a look at the if command. I'm just going to get rid of all of this. So it actually works very, very similarly to how it works in JavaScript. The syntax is pretty much identical. So we start with the word if. We contain our statement in brackets, just like with JavaScript, and then we have curly brackets to surround the function that we want to take place if the statement is true. So let's see how that might work. Let's create a variable called number and set it equal to 1. And then we'll say if number, remember we need double equals this time, is equal to 1. If we put single equals, then what that will do is set the variable number to 1 and execute the statement no matter whether or not the variable number was previously equal to 1 or not. So try and remember, always use 2 equals when you want to compare two different values. So if number is equal to 1, we'll echo true. See that in action? There it is. So number is indeed equal to 1. Of course, if we change it, if number is equal to 3, nothing will happen. If we want something to happen if the statement is not true, we need to add an else statement, like that. We'll echo false up there. Great. So either it's true or it's not. We'll create another number and set it equal to 2. We can then compare two variables like that, and obviously that's still false. What if we wanted to check if two numbers were not the same, were dissimilar to each other? Well, just like in JavaScript, we use an exclamation mark, which is generally our not operator. So if the number variable is not equal to the other number variable, then this will return true, or it will display true. There we go, because they're different. Fantastic. Another way to do that is to set that equal to and then put an exclamation mark around the whole thing. So this means if number is equal to other number not, essentially. So it's another way of saying if number is not equal to another number. So that's still true because number does not equal other number. Okay, just a couple of other things to look at. We'll introduce a third number. And set that equal to 2 as well. So obviously if we compare third number to other number, they will be the same. So we'll get a true result there. If we set them not equal to each other, turns out to be false because they are the same. Now what if we want to check that third number is equal to other number and the first number is also equal to other number? Well, very simply we can just introduce the word and there and make our second statement number equals other number. So this one will turn out to be false because even though third number equals other number, the first number does not equal other number. So for this whole statement to be considered true, both of these individual statements have to be considered true, and they're not. So if I refresh that, it will come out to be false. What if I only wanted to test if one of those statements was true? So either this statement was true or that one. Very simply, I can add an OR operator between the two. And now that returns true because this statement is true. So if we only want one of our two statements to be true, then we can use the OR statement to achieve that. Now I recommend having a little play around with OR statements and AND statements. You could even add a third statement there and see what that does, and that will give you a really good understanding about how if statements work in general and in PHP specifically. So just like with JavaScript, PHP has 4 loops, which are extremely similar in terms of their syntax. Let's see how they're going to work. If you remember, with JavaScript, we set the initial value of a variable, we set the final value, and then we set the increments that we wanted the variable to increase or change by. With JavaScript, with PHP, we do exactly the same thing. So let's have our variable string I. Notice with JavaScript we would have had a var statement there to define it. We don't need that in PHP. We just start to use a variable, and if it's not already in existence, PHP will define it for us. So let's start with string I equal to 1. As with JavaScript, we put a semicolon at the end of that instruction, and we'll keep going as long as I is less than or equal to 10. And if you remember the command I++, that just has the effect of adding 1 to I every time. So it's a straightforward loop which will take I from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then, as always, we have our curly brackets to separate our function that we want to do each time this loop goes around. And for the moment, we'll just display I. And I'm going to put a line break in there as well, so that each I will display on a separate line. So we're displaying I and then a line break each time. Let's have a look at that. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fantastic. So what if we wanted to go up in 2s every time? Well, we'd simply change this statement to something like I equals I plus 2. There we go. We start at 1 and we go up 2 each time. So we could change that to anything we like. Go up in 5s all the way to 100. looks like that. Fantastic. We can also decrease I each time. Now be careful, if I was to run this, it would take a very long time to run, or in fact it would take an infinity of time to run, and it would just hang essentially if I tried to run it. So we need to make sure that we change everything round. So we'll start at 500 and then we'll keep going as long as I is greater than 100 in this case. So this is going to start at 500 and decrease I by 5 every time until I reaches 100. Great. PHP also has a very useful function called for each, which allows you to loop through the variables within an array and do something with them. So I'm just going to comment out that code. There we go. We haven't seen that before, but we can use this in PHP just like we can in JavaScript. Slash and star starts a comment and star slash ends a comment. So now if I run that, that script won't actually get executed. Which is great. So let's define Let's define an array and loop through it with the for each function. So we'll have an array variable. We'll have some animals this time. So we'll have cat, dog, turtle, and kangaroo. So there's our array. Let's just make sure that that's all as we would like. Ooh, I've done something wrong. I've forgotten my array command there. There we go. So when you define an array, you need to put that array command in to make it work, and now our array looks good. Great, so how do we use the for each function? Very straightforward. So for each, and then brackets, and we want to loop through the array variable, like that. So we put in the array variable first, and then we want to loop through it as key and value. So what that will do is it will loop through the array variable, and each time it loops through it will set the key, that is the 0, 1, 2 and 3, to the variable key, and it will set the actual value, so cat, dog, turtle, kangaroo, to the variable value. So let's just see that. We'll have key is the key, and then value is the value. And we'll put a line break at the end. There we go. So key is 0 and value is cat, key is 1, value is dog, key is 2, value is turtle, etc., etc. So that can be really useful when you've got a whole range of values in an array and you want to do something with them, or perhaps you want to search through them to find one in particular. The for each command is extremely powerful to help you to do that. This is our final video on basic control structures using PHP, and after this video we'll move on to actually getting PHP to interact with your website using forms, sending emails, all of that sort of exciting stuff. So the last thing that I want to show you before we do all that is while loops. So we saw these again in JavaScript. They're pretty straightforward in PHP. Let's see how they work. Just as in JavaScript, we use the while command. And then let's say while our variable is less than 20, then do something. Now we've got a couple of issues here with this while loop as it stands. Firstly, I haven't actually given our value of our variable I a value as yet. So let's start by doing that. We'll set I equal to 1 initially. Now we've got an even bigger issue now. This will actually go on forever and ever and ever, because I is never going to change unless we give it an instruction to do so. So somewhere in our while loop we need to increase I, so that I is going up, in this case 1 by 1 by 1. And what shall we do? We'll just display it for now. So echo string I. Let's see what happens if we don't put the line break in this time. We get the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 20. So I've just used a while loop to replace a for loop essentially here. So a while loop does basically the same thing. It's just formatted slightly differently, which generally makes it a little bit more powerful. I find that I use while loops a lot more than for loops when I'm programming. We can also use while loops to loop through arrays, just like the for each command. Let's see how we do that. Let's create an array. Don't forget the array command. We'll have some fruits this time, so apple, banana, and grape. So if I'm going to use my string I as my counter variable, I need to start it off at 0, because I know that array 0 is going to be apple. And I want to keep going as long as something in this array exists. So all I need to do is say while array and then string I. So I will start off as being 0. So when we start running this while loop, then array 0 will work, because array 0 is equal to apple. Then when we increase I by 1, we get array 1, which is banana. Then increase I by 1 again, we get 2. And array 2 is grape. And then when I becomes 3, we're going to run out of options because there's no array 3. So let's see how that works. Excellent. Apple, banana, grape. So because the array 3 doesn't exist, this loop will only keep going until we run out of elements in our array. So it's another way to loop through an array. Quick challenge for you. Can you do the same thing that we did before using the for each function and have a small sentence which displays the key of the array and then the value associated with that key? Okay, I hope you did something like key is string I, because it's the I variable, which is our key, and then the value is array string I. Take a look at that. Great. There we go. I might just add in a line break to make it a little clearer. Great. So while loops are an alternative to for loops, but I think generally slightly more powerful, and as I say, I use them slightly more than for loops. Now, sending email with PHP is a very commonly used function, and it's pretty easy to achieve. So let's see how we can do it. I'm going to get rid of my HTML form for the moment, because we're not going to use that this exercise. So, very simple. We just set up the email address that we want to send from, the email address that we want to send to, the subject, and the content of the email. So let's do that. So let's have an email to. Now I'm going to use a test email address that I use, test@greenhost.org.uk. We'll have a subject of, I hope this works. We'll have a body of, I think you're great. And then specify the from address. We add a variable called headers, where we can specify lots of different things about the email, but for the moment we'll just specify the from address, and we do that by entering from, and we'll say rob@robpercival.co.uk. Okay, and then to actually send the email, all we need to do is use the mail command, and we use email to state where the email is going, and we enter the subject, then we enter the body, and then we enter the headers. So that's it. That should send an email to test@greenhost.org.uk. Let's see if it works. So first we'll just refresh the page. You'll notice that nothing appears because this mail command doesn't actually display anything, it just sends the email. Then I'm going to go over to my inbox at greenhost.org.uk, refresh it there, and I think I'll refresh the page twice. So there it is. There's the email. A couple of other things to note about sending mail. First, it can be useful to see whether the mail command was actually successful. Now, if we just echo the mail command, it does actually return something. So if I refresh that, it returns a 1 if it's successful. So that means that we can say if the mail command, then do something, else do something else. So if the mail command is equal to 1, then this first bit of code will run, and I can just display mail sent successfully. That of course doesn't necessarily imply that it's been received. It could be an invalid email address here, and the mail command would still send the email, it just wouldn't arrive. So it's been sent successfully, not necessarily received successfully. And if it doesn't work, we'll say mail not sent. So if I then refresh that again, it will say mail sent successfully. If I do something like change the email to be an empty string, then the mail not sent alert will pop up because the mail command will have failed. So that's how you send an email with PHP. In the next video, we're going to have a look at creating a contact form, which was a very common. So that's how you send an email with PHP. In the next video, we're going to look at how to create a contact form. Great, so we've covered the basic control structures in PHP. Let's have a look at how we can actually get PHP to interact with our users. The first way we're going to do that is using something called get variables. Now, we did touch on this during the jQuery part of the course, but we didn't look at how it actually works with PHP. So, very simply, you may have noticed that on some websites you get a URL which has a question mark and then some variable definition after that. So something like that. Index.php question mark name equals Rob. So this is setting up a get variable which has a name of name and a value of Rob. So how do we get access to that in PHP? It's pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, we do have an issue with get variables on temporary domain names. So if you're using the free hosting that comes with the course, then you will need a proper domain name to practice this on. Don't worry too much if you can't do that, just watch the video, and in the next video we'll look at post variables, which will work on temporary domain names and are actually what we use more in production anyway. But I've now switched over to my completewebdevelopercourse.com and I've created a PHP folder and I've got an index.php file in there, and that's the one that I'm editing here. So if we create a get variable, let's have name equals Rob. At the moment that doesn't do anything because I haven't put any code in yet. But how do I then access that get variable with my PHP code? It's very simple. There is a system array called _get, and that contains all of the get variables which are in the URL of the name. So for the moment, let's just display that array. So print _r, and we'll get all of the get variables. So there we go. So name is Rob there. I could add another one. Surname is Percival. There we go. So to add more and more get variables to your URL, you just put an and symbol in between. Now, one issue with this, and the reason that we don't use this a lot in production, is that it's displayed right there in plain text. So if, for example, you wanted a user to log into your website, you definitely wouldn't want to use get variables for that, because then their password is going to be displayed right there in the domain name. And that's what post variables are much better for. So I wouldn't recommend using this for that purpose. But if you want to direct a user to a particular page on your site, and you want that page to be aware of the user's name or the user's email address or something like that, then giving them a link with their email address at the end as a get variable is a really useful way to do that. Okay, so let's do something a little bit more interesting with our get variables, and we'll introduce a form. So now we're going to start combining PHP and HTML. It works brilliantly well in that you can very simply put some text before and after your PHP code, and everything is interpreted by the browser. So there's our top text, there's our PHP code, and there's some more text. So you can put PHP right there in the content of your website if you like. Now that's not actually recommended as a practice because it leaves you with really quite messy code. You've got some HTML, you've got some PHP, some more HTML, and it all gets quite nasty. So I'm going to show you better ways to put PHP into your websites, but for now we'll just put it right there in the code of the page. So now that we're bringing in some HTML, let's go back to our, let's close that down, website files, and get our nice starting point for our websites. So I've just copied that, and we'll bring that into our index.php document. There we go. So notice that PHP documents don't actually have to contain PHP at all. That's just a plain HTML document, and if I display that, we get the video that we used in the HTML part of the course. But we want to do something a little bit more interesting. So let's create an HTML form. I'll give that to you as a quick challenge. So a form with any kind of input and a submit button. Go for it. Okay, I hope you managed it. We just use the form command. We'll have a label and I'm going to have just a name in my form and an input with a name of name and a type of text. That's my input, and then for my submit button, just have an input with a type of submit, and actually we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so that's my form. Very, very simple. Let's see what happens when I actually submit that. Let's have a new name. Have Ian this time. Now, what's happened there, when I've submitted the form, it's done a get submit. So that means that it's put the variable name, which is just name there, and it's set the value to what I typed in the form. So we can get those variables with PHP. Actually, I'll just finish off my label. Would have been better to do before, but there we go, that's fine. So now we've got our name, so how do we actually access that with PHP? Well, let's put a bit of PHP above the form, like that. Now the first thing we want to do with our PHP is work out whether the form has actually been submitted. So one way to do that is to look at whether the name variable has a value. So we can do that very simply. If string underscore get name, and that's it. So that will return true if string underscore get name has a value. Then do something. So if the get name variable exists, then for the moment let's just display that. So echo your name is. Now this time I need to close the double quotes and concatenate those two strings together. So have and get name after, string get name afterwards. If I try and put it in, I'll get an error because it'll confuse these quotes and this array with actual content for this echo string. So when you're displaying these arrays with extra quotes there, then it's always better to close your main string and append it or concatenate the two together rather than just try and put it in the main code. Let's see that. Great. Your name is Ian and Fred. Fantastic. So a couple of issues with that. If we submit an empty name, the code won't do anything. Now that might be absolutely fine. It might be what we want, but we might want to give them an error to say that they haven't entered their name. So how would we do that? Well, if we go down to the submit button and give the submit button a name, let's just call it submit, and a value, call that submit as well. Remember I'll just show you something different to what was already there. The value of the submit input is what will actually appear on the button there. So value is submit your name. So that's changed that there. Now if I click on submit your main now, we get name is nothing. So the name is empty because I didn't type it in, but the submit is equal to submit your name. And it's been URL encoded there because we don't like spaces in URLs. So we put pluses there instead. So submit is equal to submit your name. So whenever they submit this form, you're always going to get a value for the submit button or the submit variable. So we can actually use that to check whether or not they submitted the form. Let's do that. So if get submit, so if that exists, then the form has definitely been submitted. So then within that, we want to check for if the name has been entered, then display it. Else, if the name hasn't been displayed or hasn't been entered, please enter your name. So that's a more robust way of testing whether or not they've submitted the form. Let's have a look at that. If I now refresh that, so if I enter an empty value for the name column, it says please enter your name. If I enter Rob, or Rob Percival, your name is Rob Percival. So what we've done there is pretty basic, but it's the beginnings of some very powerful interactions between our website, our HTML code, and our server. So how do we get our form to submit without actually displaying all of the values of the form fields in the URL itself? We use something called post variables. Very simple to use. All we need to do is change our form method to be equal to post. And that means that the form will submit using the post method rather than the get method, which is the default. So I'll refresh the page first so that we've got our new form method in there. And then I'll use good old Ian as my name and then submit that. And you can see that this is now being submitted as a post variable. So we've still got the old get variables in our URL. So let's get rid of those and just use index.php. And now let's do that again. Fred this time. There we go. So now you can see there's no information there. So there's no way for the user to see the values of the form fields that they filled in. But we can access them on the server using this post variable. So as a quick challenge to get you to put this lot together, can you make a few alterations to our existing code so that you set up an array with 3 names in it, and then the PHP server, when the form is submitted, it checks as to whether the name is one of the names that you entered, and if it is, it says hello, and if it doesn't, it says I don't know you. Give it a try. I hope you managed it. This is the way I'm going to do it. So let's get rid of printing post. We don't need to change the form at all. That does everything that we need. But we do need to change our get variables to post variables because we're doing everything using post now. So at the moment that will respond exactly how our form did before. Let's have another look at Fred. So your name is Fred. Great. And if I don't enter a name, it says please enter your name. So let's create our array. I'll call it names. We'll define an array. So far I've used Fred, Rob, and Ian. So I'll keep those as my 3 names. And then I only want to check whether or not the name is one that I know if they've actually entered a name. So I'll put my code to do that here. So we want to loop through this array. I've showed you a couple of ways to do that. I'll use the for each command. and I want to loop through the names array, and I'll call each individual name a name. Now notice I've left something out there. I haven't put in the other part like we had before. That's because I don't care what the key value is for each of these. I just care what the result is, or the value of the individual variables. So if you just have names as name, then that will just return Fred, then Rob, then Ian. So it saves me having to deal with the keys, which I'm not interested in. So all we want to do is each time we loop through, we want to check if the post variable that they've submitted as their name is equal to, remember we need a double equals, to the particular name that we're testing it against. And if that's true, we'll say I know you. Why not add your name is name. Okay. Now if it's not true, we can't put an else statement there. We can't put an else statement here saying something, I don't know you, because it's not going to be equal to all three of those names. At most it's going to be equal to one of them. So ideally, we'll set another variable, say know you, let's call it like that, know you equals 1. I could use true there or some other value. I'm just setting the know you variable. So now we want to check, once we've gone through that process, we want to, oops, I don't want to do it there. So after the for each process, I want to then check if the know you variable exists. And if it doesn't exist, then I want to say I don't know you. So I can do that by saying if know you, so that will check if the variable exists. We want to check if it doesn't exist, so we put an exclamation mark in front of it, then echo I don't know you. We can still give the name. Okay, that should do it. So let's have a look first of all. Let's submit nothing. It still says please enter your name. If I enter a name that it knows, it says I know you. Your name is Fred. Great. And if I have another name, Betty, it says I don't know you, Betty. Great. So I hope you managed to do something similar to that. In the next video, we'll learn how to create a contact form and send an email. Now in the first challenge for the PHP section of the course, we're going to create a contact form which then emails you when someone gets in touch with you on your website. So I'm going to pause briefly for you to pause the video and have a go at this yourself. So create a nice looking form with a name, maybe a subject and the nature of the comment or contact, whatever it might be, and then send an email when the form is submitted. I hope you had a good go at it. Maybe you managed to do the whole thing, maybe not. We'll start from scratch here and get a form set up in no time. So I'm going to keep the content that we had here, but I'm going to comment it out because I don't want this script to send an email every time I refresh it to make sure it's working. Now, in the challenges here, we want to make our websites look quite nice, not just function. So I'm going to go back to Bootstrap and very quickly put in the Bootstrap links to use Bootstrap in this site. And we'll put the JavaScript down at the end of the page. Okay, and then I'm going to get rid of those div commands and just do a quick h1 tag just to make sure Bootstrap is all installed. Everything looks nice. Great. Okay, so let's make this email form nice and centered first of all. I hope you can remember how to center a div with Bootstrap. So we'll have an class of container, as we always do in Bootstrap. Close the div, and then we have another div with a class of row. And then finally within that we have a div with a class of col md6, and then col md6 md offset 3, sorry, and that will then create a column div which is 6 columns wide but offset by 3 columns, so it'll be nicely centered in our 12 column setup. Close the div there. So that's just padded a little bit, but if we bring it in, it'll look quite nice. Let's give it another class of email form and put in some styles. Could have been an ID actually, but we'll carry on with class anyway. We'll give it a border and a border radius of 10 pixels. Okay, maybe a little bit of padding at the top, or a margin at least at the top, just to move it down a touch. Okay, so we've got a nice div there which is going to contain our contact form. Right, let's put our form together then. So we start with a form tag, and we want a method of post because we don't want to display all the information in the URL itself. Close our form tag. Wonder if you can remember how to create some form elements in Bootstrap. So we have a div with a class of form group. Close that div, and then within the form group we're going to have a label for, so we'll start with a contact name. So your name, and then an input with a type of text, a name of name, and a class of form control, and we'll give it a placeholder of your name. Let's just see how that looks. Nice. I'm liking that. I'm going to copy that whole form group. We want to get the email address of the person that's getting in touch so that we can reply to them. So we'll change label to email. The name of this will be email, and we'll change the type to email as well. And we'll change the placeholder text to your email. Great, so we've got name, we've got email. We could ask some other questions there, but I'll just put a third and final one, which will be your comment. So we'll call it comment. This one we want to give them a lot of room, so instead of an input, we'll have a text area, which will still have a class of form control, a name of comment, and then we'll just close the text area there. Great, that looks nice. I think I might want to make that comment slightly larger, that comment box. So I'm only going to have one text area on my page, so I'll just use text area to select it, and we'll give it a height of maybe 120 pixels. Okay, now we just need a submit button. So underneath that div we'll have an input with a type of submit. Now we need a class of button, and we'll have button success. Make a nice large green button. In fact, let's make it a bit larger. Button-LG, and we'll give it a value of submit. Okay, let's take a look at that. Nice. I'm liking that. I think we could do with a little bit of padding at the bottom. So let's give our form some padding at the bottom. 20 pixels should do it. Lovely. Okay, let's just see. That does really extend very nicely to a full screen and collapse nicely as well. I think I'm just going to add a little bit of text above the form. Give it a class of lead so it's slightly prominent. Please get in touch. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, I think that looks really nice. Now, we could do some JavaScript validation, but we have already done a video on that, so I won't spend a lot of time going into JavaScript validation for this form. If you want to add it on yourself, please do, and give us a link in the forums and we'll take a look. But we'll just do some server-side validation, because JavaScript validation is not something to be relied upon. The user might have JavaScript turned off, for example, or something may have happened in between submitting the form and the server getting the data. So you should always verify at the server side at the very least. If you want to do JavaScript verification as well, then that gives a greater user experience, generally speaking, but you should definitely verify at the server side. So now we've got our form. Let's bring in our PHP. So where do we want the actual success or failure of this to appear on our form? I think we want to make it appear underneath the heading there, so before the get in touch. So what we'll do, I don't really want to put the whole of my PHP code in there, so I'll just put a little bit of PHP code, which is going to be echo result. Simple as that. So now, if they haven't submitted the form and result doesn't exist, it won't display anything, but that gives me the freedom to then put my PHP code right at the top of this document, so it keeps it out of the way of everything else. Okay, so first thing we need to test for is whether or not the form has been submitted. We can do that by looking for the post value for the submit form, the submit button, sorry. I could do with giving that a name first of all, so we'll look for the submit variable there. Okay, so let's just set the result to form submitted, just so I can check that this is working. Great, it is. Fantastic. In fact, because we're using Bootstrap, we can do a little bit better than that. That code isn't very, that text is not very nicely laid out, so I'm going to use an alert, which I can do very easily, just by bringing in a class. Now, I like to use double quotes in my HTML. So if I'm going to use double quotes in my HTML, rather than escaping each quote individually, I can just change the container quotes to single quotes, and then I can use double quotes quite happily in the middle of my code without getting any issues with closing the string too early. So we've got a class of alert, and then we're going to make it an alert success. We'll say form submitted, close the div. Now when I refresh that page, it wants to know whether I want to submit that form again. I will, and now we've got a really nice, well set out success message there. Okay, so we'll leave that there for the moment. But we want to do a bit of validation. So do we want to check whether the name has been submitted? We probably do. So we want to make sure that they've actually entered a name. So if an name has been entered, then that's good. We actually want to check whether a name has not been entered. Then we'll do this in a very similar way to how we did the JavaScript validation. So we'll create an error of please enter your name. So if the name is missing, then we get a nice error there. Let's do the same with email. Please enter your email address, and we'll do the same with comment, because we do want all of those three fields to be filled in. Okay, and now we can change our result to be if there's an error, then we don't want a success, we want a danger, and we'll use strong to say there were errors. We don't know how many errors there will be, so we'll just put a brackets around there. If you want to add a bit of code to work out how many errors there are, then please do. There are errors in your form, and then we'll put the error message there. Okay, let's take a look. So we're definitely going to have some errors. Oh, we've got a couple of problems there. I need to switch to that. To using single quotes. Now you'll notice that it's only entered please enter a comment. That's because the error is been changed each time. We want to include each of those, and ideally we want to put them on a separate line. So let's make a couple of changes. Let's put a line break at the beginning of each error, and then that will put the error on a separate line. And also you may have noticed that I forgot to end the strong tag. And the final thing I want to change is if I want to include more than one error, I need to, I can either do something like this. That error is equal to error plus this extra content that we've now added to it. There's a nice shorthand for that. I can use error dot equals and error dot equals there, and then that will just append that string onto whatever error already is. I don't need that at the beginning because this is the first one, but I could actually put that on there because error is blank at the beginning anyway. It doesn't really make sense to do that, so I'll leave that off. Let's have a look at that now. Great. So now our errors are looking really good. I don't think we need to do any validation on the name. We could check for a certain number of characters, but I think we'll leave that for now. And similarly with the comment, we could check for a minimum number of characters, but I think the only thing we really want to validate is the email address. Now you'll remember in JavaScript we had to create our own regex, or regular expression, to validate an email address. In PHP we don't need to do that. There's a very useful function called filter var. I'll just show you the explanation for it on the php.net site. So the filter var function will filter a variable and check whether it's of a certain type. So that's really useful for us. We don't need to look at all those details there. The useful thing for us is the types of filters that we can use. So if we look at validate filters, so we can check whether the variable is of a Boolean type, that is a yes or no, or true or false. We can check that whether it's an email, that's going to be the useful one for us. We can check that it's a valid IP address, valid URL, valid regular expression, etc., etc. So the one that we're going to use here is the filter validate email. So if I go back to save me typing, I can just copy that bit of code there. You'll find yourself doing that a lot when you find bits of code that are useful. Just copy them, no need to retype them. So down here, sometimes they do need a bit of formatting. So we can see what they're looking like. There we go. Missed the E off there. So that's the code. I need to change that to the variable that I want to filter. The email address is the post email. So that will then check the post email, and I'm actually interested in whether it's not an email address. So I'm going to put my exclamation mark, my not operator there. And that means I don't need to worry about else. And then if it's not an email address, I'm going to add a new error saying line break, and then please enter a valid email address. Let's see how that looks. Great. So it's realized that our blank email address is not valid. The only thing is I don't really want the enter your email address and enter a valid email address as being two different error messages. So really I only want this error message to appear if they have at least entered an email address. That's easy enough to achieve. I just check whether the email exists, whether the variable exists and is non-zero, and then put the AND operator in there. So this then will only give that error if the email has been entered and it's invalid. So let's just check that. So that's easy enough to fix. All I need to do is check whether or not the entered email address is not empty. So it's not equal to nothing, essentially. So remember, this is my not operator, and this is equal to nothing. And then I use the AND operator there to make sure that both of those have to be true. So we're now only going to get this message if the email has actually been entered, but it's not valid. Let's just check that out. There we go. So we're not getting the message there. If I then put an invalid email, we actually get some automatic validation. That's great. So you'll remember that we put type equals email in here. If you put type equals email, then Bootstrap will actually automatically do the email validation for you, which is terrific. It means that I can't really check my PHP email validation, but let's just change the type to text for the moment so that we can check that. So now that will allow me to enter anything into the email. And there you can see that it's realized that there is an email address and only given the error that it needs to be valid. But that shouldn't be much of a problem, as long as the user doesn't have JavaScript switched off. Okay, so I think that's all the validation that I need. We've got a valid email and we've got a name and we've got a comment. So if that's all true, then we want to send the form. So here we go. So else, first of all, let's create a nice success message. Oh no, we don't necessarily want a success message yet because our sending might be unsuccessful. Okay, so let's send the form first. So mail, and then we want a sender of, we want it to go to my email address. So I'll use test@greenhost.org.uk, and we'll have the subject comment from website, and in the body we want to give the information that we need, so the name, the email and the comment. So we'll just create a string on the fly, as it were. So our name is going to be post name. I'm going to use a couple of enters there to do some line breaks in that bit of code. So our name is post name, our email is post email. You'll notice I'm using single quotes to not confuse with the double quotes, and the comment is post comment. There we go. And this time I'm not going to bother with the header because it doesn't really matter who this form is sent by or who this email is sent by. As long as it gets through to me, I'll know that it's come from my website. Okay, so that's my mail command. I now want to check whether that was successful. So if it was successful, then we want to give them a success message. So I'll just copy and paste that. So we'll have a success alert. And inside the strong we'll say thank you. And then in the rest of it we'll now you'll notice I've used a single quote there, so I'll have to escape that because we're using single quotes to contain our string. I'll be in touch. So that can be my success. And then the other option is that for some reason we couldn't send the mail. Now it's not necessarily clear why that didn't work. So we'll just say, sorry, there was an error sending your message. Please try again later. Okay, great. So now we're pretty much done. Let's just check that our error message all error messages all work quite nicely, so submit that. So we don't have an email address, we don't have a comment, we did have a name. Now notice what's happened there. The name that I've just entered disappeared because when I refresh the page it didn't have the name anymore. Now that's not ideal. If you want the user to re-enter their details when they've made a mistake, you don't want them to have to retype the whole comment just because they had a typo in their email address. So what we can do to sort that out is actually give the inputs a value and then set that value equal to the post variable that they entered last time. So you see what I've done there? I've just opened up a little bit of PHP, a little snippet of PHP, which just displays the name that they've entered. Okay, and if that name is empty, i.e. they haven't entered anything, then it will still be empty on the input itself. But if they have entered something, then this will pick it up and put it in the input itself. So I'm going to copy and paste that to my email. Like that. And the text area doesn't have a value attribute. We just put it straight there in the text area. So now, if I refresh that and submit that again, it's now remembered my name. It's put my name also in the comment because I should have changed that from post name to post comment. If you take a look at that, so it's just doing the name. This site is awesome. So now it's remembered the comment, that's great, and the only error is please enter your email address. So finally, test@me.com. Okay, let's submit that. Great, thank you, I'll be in touch. So now we keep our fingers crossed and hope that the message has actually been delivered. Refresh my inbox there it is. So you notice because we didn't set a sender, it comes up as just from completewebdevelopercourse.com, but it's picked up the name, picked up the email address, and picked up the comment. So you can now respond to that in any way. One thing that's worth mentioning, if you're having problems getting this email delivered, it could well be because it's getting sent to your spam folder. So do check your spam folder, because what we're doing here is sending a message without a sender at all, which some email clients won't like because it doesn't look like a valid email. So you might want to play around with that if you're not actually receiving the message using this code. But congratulations, you've just created a really nice looking, highly functional, high quality contact form. Congratulations on making it to the end of the PHP part of the course. In this last challenge, we're going to put together a weather scraper. So it's going to be a website that works through Ajax, so no page refreshes at all, and it uses PHP to get the page content of a weather website and return the content of the weather for the city that the user inputs. So it's going to be reasonably complicated. It's going to use pretty much every skill that we've learned so far, a bit of HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, and JavaScript and PHP. So let's get cracking. With this one, I'd recommend following along and stopping while we do the challenges. And the first challenge is going to be to create a single one-page website, which is the height of the browser window and has a full screen background using a really nice image. I'm going to use this particular image here because I think it emphasizes the weather, but you can use any one you like. Unsplash.com has got a lot of them, or have a look at other image websites if you want to find something else. So with Bootstrap, a one-page website with nothing more than a background image. Right, I hope you did that. So I'm just going to cycle back through what we've been doing and get back the starting point for our Bootstrap site. So what we've got there is the Bootstrap CSS files and the Bootstrap JavaScript. Now notice in this case we're missing the jQuery, so we need to pop that in. Finding a link for that is simple enough. If we just search for CDN jQuery, there we go, we can find the script down there. Great. Just to explain the double slash there, you'll notice that there isn't an HTTP link there, or indeed an HTTPS link there. That's actually really useful, because if you don't know yet whether your site is going to be run over HTTP or HTTPS, then you've got two choices. If you go for HTTP, then that'll be slightly faster than the HTTPS, but it'll have the downside of causing an error on some browsers when the site is being loaded over HTTPS, because the HTTP link won't be secure. So you'll get errors if you try and do that. If you use HTTPS, that's fine, but then you're going to be slightly slower on normal HTTP connections. If you just use the double slash without any HTTP or HTTPS, then it will download the version of that you're currently using. So if your browser's on HTTP, it'll download that one. If it's on HTTPS, it'll download that one. So I definitely recommend using this double slash without the HTTP before when you're installing jQuery or Bootstrap or any other plugin. Okay, so let's get cracking. We wanted a one-page background with this image. So let's just get that image connected. It's pretty big. See if I can download a smaller version. Oh, I've lost it now. There we go. So I'll save the image onto my desktop into my websites, and then that's nice. I'll bring up FireFTP to upload it. So my website's there, it is. I don't really want that horrendous file name. So I'll right click and rename it and call it background.jpg, and then I'll click the right arrow there to upload it. It's pretty huge. It's actually 8 megabytes. So I think what I'll do, well, we'll take the opportunity to show you how to resize an image. It's actually on a Mac, it's very easy to do. So I'll click download. There's my image. Save it as, and I'll put it in my websites and call it background probably.jpg. There it is. Now I think it's a pretty huge image. I don't need it to be that large, so in preview here on the Mac you can just resize an image. Yeah, 5,000 pixels, we definitely don't need it to be that big. Let's make it 1,200. That should be plenty big enough. Okay, then we'll save that. While that's saving, we'll switch over to FireFTP. Now here's my websites on the desktop. So I'm going to take my background.jpg file, and you can see it's a reasonable file size, 400 kilobytes. and then upload that. Oh, it's already uploaded. Fantastic. I'll just overwrite it to be sure. So now I've got index.php and background.php on my server. So I'm going to start with making my container div in the usual way, and then creating a row div within that, and finally creating a nice colmd 6 with colmd offset 3, so that'd be nicely centered on large screens and full screen on mobiles. There we go, and we'll just put a little bit of content in there. There we go, there's my few letters. Now we'll start introducing our styles. So mostly I want to style container. There's only going to be one container in this website, so I'm just going to use that particular class. And the main thing we want to do is to give it a background image with a URL of background.jpg. Good to just check that that works. It's picking up the image. It is indeed, but it's not very tall yet. So we want to set the width to be 100% and the height to also be 100%. But we have a slight issue there. If I refresh that, you'll see the height actually hasn't updated at all. That's because the height of the body is only actually the height of that tiny div there. So if we want to get our container to be the whole size of the viewer's browser window, we need to set the HTML and the body heights to both be equal to 100%, i.e. the full browser window. And then the container, as it's a div within the body, can then be 100% of the body, which will then be the full size of the page. So there we go, that stretches it out nicely. I do want my background size to be cover, so we avoid any nasty scaling or anything like that. So you can see that the bit of text that we've got is skipping nicely into the center of the page when we want it to. One thing you'll notice is when we move the browser window to get a small screen, it's not centering the image for us, which didn't matter too much with our last image, but this one really does need to be centered, otherwise it looks very odd to have this sort of half of an image there. So that's easy to fix. We just add a background position attribute and give it a value of center. And now it'll always be nicely centered no matter how wide the screen is. Great. Okay, so back to our content. Here's another challenge for you then. Can you create a nice centered div with a title? You might want to call it weather predictor or anything like that, and then create a quick bit of text explaining how it works, and then have an input with a button for the user to enter their city in order to work out what the weather is. Right, I hope you got something nice. I'm going to start with an H1. Weather predictor is a bit of a lame name. Hopefully you can come up with something better. But this will do. I'm going to have a P with a class of lead. And it's just going to say enter your city below to get a forecast for the weather. Right, now we need our form. And we have our div with a class of form group. Close the div there. And I don't think we'll need a label here. We'll just have a single input with a type of text and a class of form control. We'll give it a name of city, and we'll need to refer to it later, so we'll give it an ID of city as well. Great, that takes care of our form group. Now we'll just have a button this time. If you've done an input, that's absolutely fine, that'll work as well. And we'll make it a button success, so a nice tempting green button. And why not make it large as well? And we'll say find my weather. Great, let's have a look at that. See how it all looks. Nice, okay, so I'm liking that. I do want to center things a little bit more, and I think I want to change that color to white. So let's create a couple of classes, center and white. So color, white there, and text align center. So if I change this class to center, that should do the trick. Nope, we're going to need to center these two as well. That's better. And we want both of those to be white. So let's add a white class. Great. I'm liking that. Maybe we can move it down a touch. So we can give the container a padding top of, let's say, 150 pixels. Great. I'm liking how that looks. And then I'd like to spread it out a little bit. So let's give the P some padding at the top, let's say 30 pixels, and some padding at the bottom, let's say another 30 pixels. A little too much. Let's just try 15. Okay, great. I'm liking that. One final thing, I think I want to move that button down a little. So let's give it a margin. £20. Great. Okay, so that's nicely spread out. Looking good. Obviously, nothing works. Maybe we could give them a placeholder on the input. Give them a couple of examples. So e.g. London, Paris, San Francisco. There we go, so that just makes our website a little bit more friendly. Okay, so now the tricky bit. We actually need to make a script which gets the weather. And we're going to use file get contents to do this, to get the weather from a weather website. And we're going to do something called scraping, which is taking the content of the URL and then extracting the information that we need from it. So we're going to get a separate PHP script to do this. So I'm going to create it using FireFTP. So create file, I'll call it scraper.php. And then let's open it and start working with that. So let's create a new page. Just copying that over. We now want scraper.php. So there we go. So the weather website that we're going to use is one called weather-forecast.com. Let me show you how that looks. Here we've got the London forecast. So that's the information that we're going to take, or some of it at least. And the reason that we're using this particular website is because it allows us to search for a city very easily just by putting that city in the name or in the URL of the page that we look for. So if I change that to Liverpool, then we get the Liverpool weather forecast. Now notice that works really well for cities which have a single name. So Paris, for example, works well. But if we try and put New York in there, we get an error. However, if we just get rid of the space, then it interprets it very nicely and puts a dash in there for us. Similarly, if we try something like San Francisco, that doesn't work, but if we take out the space, it works fine. So what we're going to have to do when the user enters their city, if it's got a space in it, we'll just take it out, and that should do the trick and allow us to find the weather. Okay, so we've got our weather page there. So going back over here, your next quick challenge is to write some code to download the HTML of the weather page for San Francisco. There's your URL. I hope you managed it. You would need to start with opening your PHP, and then we use file get contents, put double quotes around the URL, and then let's take a look. Maybe we'll put an S in there. Take another look. And finally, we'll add an echo so it actually displays something. There we go. Great. So displaying really nicely there. Now what we're not going to want to do is just display the whole of this page, because that'd be pretty horrendous. So we need to just pick a small part of the page. What bit of information do we think is going to be most useful to our users? It doesn't really matter, you can pick whichever bit you like. I'm going to go for the 3-day weather forecast summary. So that's the bit that we want to extract and display on our website. So to do that, we're going to look at the source. You can get there by right-clicking and view page source. So I want to find this 3-day weather forecast summary. There it is. So that's the code that I'm interested in. I'm going to use regex, regular expressions, to get in there and extract this bit of information. That's what I want. So let's see how we're going to do that. First of all, instead of displaying the contents of that file, we need to set it to a variable so that we can do something with it. So we'll just call it contents. And now we need to do our regular expression. So let's see how we do regex in PHP. First of all, we'll just comment out that line so that we're not downloading this file every time we do a check. So regex in PHP is pretty straightforward. You just need to know one command, which is preg match. So let's take a look at finding some code in the actual contents of this website. So let's keep it simple for now and just look for the text 3-day weather forecast summary. Let's just put that in there. Okay, let's hope it finds it. There it is. So it's found that. That's great. So how do we actually extract some text and get the data from it? Let's say we wanted to extract the words weather forecast from this whole sentence. We can do that with this little bit of code. Very simply. 2 brackets, a dot, a star, and a question mark. So essentially when you use these characters together, they match whatever is in between this bit of starting text, so 3-day, and this bit of finishing text, summary. I'm not going to go into great details of how that works, but if you want to look that up, please do. There'll be a link to it in the docs for this section of the course. Let's just see what that does now. So now it's matching not only the initial bit of text that it's found, but it's actually returning the part that we're interested in, this middle bit here. So that is really powerful. That enables us to extract information from the websites from the parts that we want. Okay, so how can we change this code to return what we want? Well, let's extract that bit, the 3-day weather forecast. That should be enough to uniquely identify this section of the page. So we'll replace our 3-day with that. And then we might need to escape that backslash there, because otherwise that's going to consider it to be the end of the regex, which is not what we want. And then we want to go all the way up to this span here. So we can actually just use the less than sign, square bracket there, because that will be the end of the bits of text that we're interested in. And one other thing that we need to change is we need to change /i to /s, because we want to do a multi-line check here, and it could go wrong if we don't put the /s modifier there to make sure that we're searching for more than one line. Okay, let's take a look. It hasn't like that. Aha, that's because we need to put single quotes around the whole thing, because we've got some double quotes inside there. Let's take a look. Fantastic. So that's exactly what we want, or this bit here specifically is exactly what we want. It's the weather forecast that we're after. Okay, so if you look at the actual array, the 0 is set to the whole thing that we've found, and the actual content that we want is the matches 1. So echo matches 1 will then display what we want. Okay, that's great. Now we're only doing San Francisco so far at the moment though. We want to make it so that we can do any domain. So we could do this in 2 ways. We could either use get variables or we could use post variables. It doesn't really matter. Get variables are probably simpler in this case, and we're not doing anything sensitive with passwords, so let's just use a straightforward get variable. So if we let the city be a particular get variable, so the city can be equal to get city, then we want to replace that with city. So that will put the city that the user has entered into the URL for us. But do remember that we needed to remove all of the spaces in our city. How do we do that in PHP? Well, there's a really handy function called str replace, and all we need to do is enter what we want to remove, what we want to remove it to. So essentially we're just taking the space and turning it into nothing. We could change any bit of text to any other bit of text using the same function. So str replace, and we're replacing it with our city. Okay, so we want to set city is equal to that. Let's have a look. So now, if I run this code, it'll do nothing because I haven't given it a city. But if I set city equals London, it should return the weather in London. Fantastic. So what that's doing is going to the weather website, extracting the whole page, and then taking the only the bit of code that we're interested in. So let's just see what happens if we put New York there. It works great. We're still getting the response. And we can even try San Francisco. Brilliant. We've got the weather there too. Okay, great. So now we've got a PHP script on our server which gets the 3-day weather forecast for the city of our choice. So what we need to do is go back to our main script and use some Ajax to call this PHP script and actually get the result. So let's do that. Let's switch over to my index.php page. Okay, so let's add some JavaScript at the bottom of the page. So we want it to happen when the Find My Weather button is clicked. So we gave it an ID, did we? No, we didn't. So let's give it an ID of Find My Weather. So can you remember how to run a jQuery function when a particular button is clicked? I hope you wrote find my weather dot click function, and then close there. I always like to just check that everything's working before I do anything more complicated. Great. So the function is running. So now we can use the jQuery get function to get our scraper.php. And let's just put in our own city for the moment. So that will return the 3-day weather forecast for London. Now we want to do something with that though. So we'll have a function with a data variable. And remember, the data is where the data that the PHP scraper has obtained for us will be stored. So for now, let's just alert data. See how that works. Just waiting for the page to refresh. Find my weather. Now what's happening there is it's actually just submitting the form, which is not what we want it to do. So if you remember, we can stop that happening by adding an event variable to our click function and then preventing the default event from happening. And that will stop the form being submitted and run our code instead. Let's take a look. Okay, there it is. Fantastic, pretty fast as well. So all we need to do now is change it so that instead of the London weather coming up every time, it picks up the city that we've filled in there. So I think it'd be worth checking to make sure that they have actually filled something in and give them an error message if they haven't. So let's say if what do we call it? We have an ID of city. So in fact, you can do that one as a quick challenge. can you get the value of the city ID and check whether it exists, and if it doesn't, then give them an alert. Okay, I hope you did something like got the city id.val is not equal to empty. So if it's not equal to empty, we want to do the get function. And if it is empty, we'll give them an alert. Please enter a city. Okay, let's just check that. Great. So they're getting the alert there. Now here we just want to replace then the city with the value of the city, or the input with the city ID. So that then should work. Let's try putting in Paris. Okay, pretty good. Let's assume that that is correct. Light rain sounds about right. Let's just do a different one. San Francisco, that's returning light rain as well. Let's just try that again. Okay, there's a lot of light rain around the world at the moment. Let's put in New York. Moderate rain. Any others? Let's put in La Paz. Mostly dry. Okay, somewhere around the world it's not raining. Good to know. Alright, so the only last thing I want to change about this site is I don't really like the fact that it pops up there. I want to get it to appear somewhere a bit nicer. In fact, we could use an alert to do that. So let's put it underneath the Find My Weather button. So down here, quick challenge for you. Can you put in an alert with a type of success and then just put some demo text in it for now? Okay, I hope you entered something like div class equals alert success, and we'll just give it some demo text for now. Okay, yeah, that looks fine. I definitely want to move it down a little bit though. So let's, well, we can just add a margin bottom to the button. Or maybe let's add one to the alert. Doesn't seem to like that. Margin top 20 pixels. There we go. Nice. I'm liking that. Obviously we don't want that to actually display until we've got some content to go in it. So let's set the display to none. And then here, instead of alerting the data, we want to show the alert. We could even use a fancy fade in. And we also want to set the HTML of the alert to our data function. We can actually do those in one line. So HTML data, and then fade in. So that will take the alert, set the HTML to the value of the data that's been returned, and then fade it in. Let's see that in action. Great. There we go. That's a pretty cool website, I think. Let's try a couple more. Sydney. Must be sunny in Sydney. Oh no, raining slightly in Sydney as well. Okay, and let's just check how it looks. Ooh, looks pretty bad. Something must have gone wrong there. Or it could just be the screen resizing wasn't keen. Oh no. Definitely done something bad there. Ah, that's because we put it outside, or I put it outside, can't blame you for that one. Put it outside this class div. Definitely want to put it inside the class div there. So let's refresh, try it again. Calcutta. Great, now it looks much nicer. I'm feeling it's slightly too low down now. So let's move it back up a touch as we've got a bit more content. So we'll give it 100 pixels at the top there. And one more just to finish it off. We'll have Basingstoke. Excellent. Now there's one final thing we need to do, and that's if they put in a city which is not returned. So at the moment, what happens if we put in an invalid town? It doesn't return anything, but it doesn't fail nicely. So we need to fix that. So if there is no data, or if data is empty because it hasn't found anything, then we need to alert the user to that. Now I think we're going to need a second alert in that case. That does mean we're going to need to give them IDs. So we'll have a success alert and we'll have a fail alert, and we want this one to be danger, and we'll just set the demo text to failed. Or in fact, we're not going to be updating that demo text at all, so we'll just set it to could not find weather data for that city. Please try again. And then we're going to need to change that from alert to success, because we only want to show that div. And if it's unsuccessful, we want to fade in the fail div, and we don't want to update it with any data this time. And of course we only want to fade in the success div if it's successful. Okay, there's one problem with the code as it stands. See if you can think what it might be. Did you spot it? The issue is, save that and refresh. If we get a failure, that works really nice, but then if we get a success after that, the failure still shows. So we want to get rid of the fail div when it's successful. We'll just hide it. And we want to get rid of the success div if it fails, to stop the opposite problem. appearing. Great, let's try that now. So that fails, and then we have a success. Great. Okay, I think I want to do one final change. I don't like this alert now, because it's just lacking a bit of style. If we get this pop-up there, I'd rather have it appear as a nice message on the page itself. So let's copy that fail div. We'll call it no city. And we'll change the text to please enter a city. And then so this time we'll just what did I call it? No city. Fade in that one if they haven't entered a city. Now you may notice that that's going to confuse things even further, because we've now got 3 possible divs that could display at any one time. So a nice way around that is to actually just hide everything. Hide all of the alerts every time we do something. And in fact, we could do that at the beginning of the function. So let's hide all of the alerts as soon as the button is clicked, and that solves all our problems, and then just the one that is correct at that point will be used. So now if we enter an empty one, that's much nicer than getting a pop-up. Please enter a city. Enter London, we get a result, fantastic. And if we enter some gobbledygook, we get a nice error. Fantastic. So if you've been following along, you've made a pretty complex site there. It uses Ajax to get a PHP script, which then scrapes the content of another website to extract the data that we want and provide it to the user. Congratulations.